You ever stand on a platform long after the last train's supposed to come? The air gets strange, too quiet. Even the fog seems to listen. That night, I waited for the midnight train, the one they said hadn't run in years. But right on the dot, the whistle blew, the tracks trembled, and through the mist, a black locomotive rolled in slow, heavy, and wrong. No passengers, no conductor, just doors creaking open and piles of suitcases sliding out, each one with a name I recognized. Then I heard something breathing inside the train, and it was getting closer.
The night was unnervingly still when I first set foot on the platform of the abandoned railway station. The air hung heavy with a silence so profound it seemed almost unnatural, as though the world had exhaled and held its breath in that forsaken place. Moonlight poured down like liquid silver, draping the cracked concrete and rusted rails in an otherworldly glow. Shadows stretched long and thin, twisting into grotesque shapes that the mind tried and failed to rationalize. I was Elias Granger, the newly appointed conductor assigned to this desolate outpost, a position no one else seemed eager to claim. The station had been out of use for years, left to rot and crumble, but every full moon, it was said, something peculiar happened. At exactly midnight, a train would arrive, no passengers, only an endless procession of luggage. The tale sounded absurd, ghost stories to scare off the curious, but my heart harbored a gnawing need to know the truth. The ancient wooden benches were worn and splintered, and faded posters peeling off the walls whispered of eras gone by. I breathed in the cool night air, tinged with the scent of damp earth and rust, and felt the weight of emptiness pressing down on me. The station was a mausoleum of forgotten journeys, a relic suspended in time. From the corner of my eye, movement. A figure emerged from the shadows, a stooped woman with sharp, piercing eyes and weathered hands that clutched a lantern. Martha Whitlock, the keeper of the station, or so I was told. Her presence was as much a part of the place as the crumbling bricks and twisted metal. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly, her voice a brittle whisper carried on the wind. "This station is cursed, Elias. The train that comes at midnight doesn't carry the living. It's a vessel for memories, regrets, and souls trapped between worlds." I met her gaze, a mixture of warning and sorrow reflected in those ancient eyes. Yet my curiosity, that fatal flame, burned brighter than my fear. "I need to understand," I replied, voice steady despite the chill creeping up my spine. Martha shook her head, the lantern's flicker casting dancing shadows across her face. "Some journeys are better left unmade." But the clock was ticking toward midnight, and the air grew thick with anticipation. Then from the mist, a sound soft at first, like the distant wail of a mournful wind, then the unmistakable clatter of wheels on iron rails. The ghostly midnight train appeared as if summoned, its carriages gleaming faintly under the full moon's glow. Not a single passenger stirred within, yet the aisles overflowed with an endless array of suitcases, stacked high and stretching beyond sight. The sight was mesmerizing and terrifying. The luggage seemed to pulse with a life of its own, whispering secrets in a language I could almost understand. Drawn by a mixture of dread and fascination, I stepped forward, the wooden platform creaking beneath my boots. The cold metal of the train's door pressed against my palm as I climbed aboard, each step echoing in the vast silence. Behind me, the station slipped away, swallowed by shadows and mist, until all that remained was the faint glow of the moonlight filtering through the train's windows. The boundaries between reality and nightmare blurred, and I knew I was no longer merely a conductor. I was a traveler on a journey through the corridors of my own soul, bound to the endless luggage and the secrets it held. The train was waiting, and so was I. The moment I stepped onto the train, the air seemed to shift a subtle change, as if the atmosphere itself was holding its breath. The heavy doors groaned shut behind me with a finality that sent a chill crawling up my spine. The dim light flickered from ancient sconces, casting long, wavering shadows over rows upon rows of suitcases, their battered leather surfaces worn smooth by time yet somehow untouched by decay. They were everywhere, stacked shoulder to shoulder, hemming in the narrow aisles like silent sentinels guarding secrets I was unprepared to face. I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the empty compartments pressing in, the absence of life more suffocating than any crowd. No footsteps echoed ahead, no murmurs of other passengers, only the quiet hum of the train settling into its eternal voyage. With a deliberate breath, I moved forward, each step echoing in the hollow belly of the carriage. My fingers brushed against the nearest suitcase, its surface cool and rough beneath my touch. I knelt down, the dust motes swirling in the pale light as I unclasped the tarnished brass buckles. The instant the lid creaked open, a flood of warmth surged through me, vivid and overwhelming. The cramped train compartment dissolved, replaced by a sprawling sunlit field where a small boy ran free, laughter ringing clear and pure. The scent of fresh grass and wildflowers filled my senses, and for a moment I was no longer the wary conductor, but a child again, unburdened by the crushing weight of years. Then, from the corner of my vision, a faint glow coalesced into the unmistakable form of young Elias myself, but smaller, untouched by the scars of time. He stood silently, eyes wide and shining, his gaze locked onto mine with a mixture of innocent wonder and quiet sorrow. I whispered to him, words swallowed by the stillness around us, aching with a longing I could not articulate. The spectral figure flickered and waned as the train lurched forward, the station dissolving into mist and shadows. Reality snapped back with a cruel jolt. The field vanished, replaced once more by the endless rows of luggage and the cold metal beneath my hands. The journey had begun. Each suitcase I touched promised a fragment of my past, a piece of the puzzle that had long eluded me. Yet with each revelation, the line between memory and nightmare blurred, and the oppressive silence of the train pressed closer, whispering of things better left forgotten. I hesitated, heart pounding in the suffocating quiet, but the pull of the unknown was irresistible. I rose and moved deeper into the carriage, the endless luggage stretching before me like a tangible manifestation of the regrets and lost opportunities I carried within. The train's journey was no longer just a ghost story, it was my own soul laid bare, traveling through the corridors of time and self. Behind me, the station vanished completely into the night, swallowed by the mist. Ahead, only the endless night and the weight of memories yet to be unearthed. I was trapped aboard the ghostly train, a conductor not of passengers, but of my own haunted past. And as the wheels began their spectral turn, I knew there was no turning back. The faint glow of young Elias lingered a moment longer before fading into the shadows, a silent reminder of innocence lost and the journey that awaited. The train pulled me deeper into its embrace, and I stepped forward, ready or not to face what lay within the endless luggage. The air inside the ghostly train car was thick with a silence so profound it pressed against Elias's eardrums like a physical weight. His fingers trembled as they brushed against the worn leather handle of the first suitcase. It was out of place here, aged and cracked, smelling faintly of dust and forgotten years. He knelt down on the cold, creaking floorboard, the wood groaning under his weight, and unclasped the latches, the metal cold and reluctant. A faint golden light flickered from within, and the air shifted, warm and alive. Suddenly, the scene dissolved from the dim, cramped carriage into a sprawling garden bathed in sunlight. The scent of jasmine and freshly cut grass filled his senses. Laughter pure, unburdened laughter echoed around him as he saw a younger version of himself chasing butterflies beneath a blue, endless sky. The boy's hair was tousled, his face radiant with joy and innocence. Elias's throat tightened, a lump forming as memories long buried surged forth, fragile as glass. "You were happy once," he whispered to the empty air, voice rough with disbelief. The vision flickered, the edges fraying like old film before dissolving back into the gloom of the train. Elias sat back on his heels, breath shallow. The suitcase lay open before him, empty now save for the lingering scent of summer and laughter. He forced himself to stand, moving to the next case. This one was heavier, its leather scuffed and mottled with age. The moment he unlatched it, a chill seeped from within, carrying the scent of rain-soaked pages and something darker, something metallic, like blood. The train car faded again, replaced by a dimly lit room filled with the soft rustle of old curtains and the muted glow of a lamp. There a woman appeared, her form spectral and shifting, her face blurred like a fading photograph. Elias's heart clenched as he recognized her. His wife, the light of his life extinguished too soon. She smiled faintly, but her eyes held a deep, unbearable sorrow. They laughed once, a brief moment of warmth and love, but the laughter twisted into whispers of regret, blame, and loss. The walls seemed to close in, the shadows lengthening and curling like dark fingers. The vision shattered abruptly, leaving Elias gasping, clutching the empty suitcase as if it might offer some comfort. His voice cracked, "I'm sorry. I never wanted this." The spectral woman faded into the gloom, leaving only the echo of unspoken apologies. Elias staggered back, the train car suddenly colder, darker. The oppressive silence pressed down harder, broken only by the distant, rhythmic clatter of wheels against rails. His eyes darted to the dozens of unopened suitcases arrayed like silent sentinels along the aisles, each one promising another fragment of his fractured past. As he moved down the corridor, a low murmur rose from the shadows, whispers faint and fractured. Voices of people long gone, or perhaps never truly alive, entwined with the fabric of his memories. Figures flickered at the periphery of his vision, faces blurred and shifting, sometimes familiar, sometimes grotesque distortions. He stopped and raised his voice, speaking aloud to the ghosts that haunted the luggage. "What are you? What do you want from me?" Only silence answered, thick and impenetrable. At the far end of the car, a faint glow caught his eye. There, standing in the dim light, was the translucent form of his childhood self. The boy was small, dressed in old-fashioned clothes, his face glowing faintly with an otherworldly light. He said nothing, only watched with wide, hopeful eyes that pierced Elias's soul. Elias felt a hollow ache swell inside him, a cavernous emptiness that the endless suitcases could never fill. The weight of his regrets, mistakes, and lost loves pressed down like an invisible shroud. He dropped to his knees beside the spectral boy, voice barely a whisper. "I don't know how to fix this." The boy's eyes held no answers, only the innocent hope of a time before sorrow had taken root. Suddenly, the train lurched, the carriage shaking as though caught in a tempest. The lights flickered wildly, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to reach for Elias like grasping hands. He stood abruptly, heart pounding, the oppressive silence shattered by the creak and groan of the ancient vessel. He was no longer sure where memory ended and nightmare began. "What is this place?" he demanded, voice raw. The only reply was the cold whisper of the night wind through the cracks of the carriage, and the endless, haunting clatter of the midnight train speeding deeper into the unknown. Elias gripped the edge of the suitcase, determination and terror warring within him. "I have to keep going," he muttered, though his voice betrayed his doubt. Because somewhere in these endless memories lay the truth of his existence and perhaps the key to escape. The faint hum of the train's wheels against the rails was the only sound breaking the suffocating silence inside the carriage. Elias Granger stood motionless, his breath shallow, eyes darting as the dim light flickered overhead. The air felt thick, heavy with a presence that pressed against his skin like cold velvet. Shadows stretched and twisted along the narrow aisle, swallowing the edges of the worn seats and the endless suitcases piled beside them. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, the mist began to gather. It seeped from the corners of the carriage, curling like smoke, coiling around Elias's ankles before rising, swirling in the stale air. His heart pounded as the spectral shapes took form within the fog, figures, indistinct but unmistakably human. Faces blurred and shimmered, their outlines wavering like flames in a draught. He recognized them instantly, though their features wavered like a fading dream. Friends, family, strangers who had once passed through his life. A sudden chill ran down Elias's spine. Among the ghostly shapes, one figure solidified with startling clarity. It was Martha Whitlock, but not the stooped, weathered woman he had met at the station. This was a younger Martha, her sharp eyes bright with determination yet shadowed by sorrow. She wore a simple dress from decades past, her hair pinned back tightly. She stood by the window, gazing out into the night, her presence both comforting and unsettling. Elias stepped forward tentatively, the wooden floor creaking beneath his boots. "Martha," he whispered, voice cracking. The apparition turned her eyes to him, and though her lips did not move, a silent message echoed in his mind: "Beware the journey." A wave of memories crashed over him, fragments of conversations, warnings she had once given, tales of the train's curse. The young Martha was a guardian of secrets long buried, a sentinel of the station's haunted past. Elias's throat tightened as he realized the depth of her connection to the spectral voyage he now endured. The other figures drifted closer, their faces flickering between clarity and obscurity. A woman who had once been a friend, a man whose betrayal had left a scar. Children laughing in a long-forgotten afternoon. Each apparition stirred a different ache within Elias's heart. He reached out, fingers trembling, but each touch dissolved into cold emptiness. "Why are you here?" Elias murmured, voice barely audible. The ghostly crowd offered no answer, only a silent chorus of longing and regret. The train's atmosphere thickened. The walls seemed to breathe, pulsing with a slow, rhythmic cadence that matched Elias's racing pulse. Time itself began to warp, the past bleeding into the present, moments folding over one another like pages in a tattered book. He saw flashes of himself as a boy, laughing and carefree, then as a man haunted by loss and guilt. These overlapping visions twisted his perception, making the carriage spin and tilt. In the midst of the swirling chaos, a small figure emerged, a glowing boy in old-fashioned clothes. Young Elias, a spectral echo of innocence and hope. Their eyes met, and the child's gaze was filled with a silent plea, a yearning to be remembered, to be saved. Elias felt a pang of sorrow so sharp it threatened to shatter him. "I'm here," he whispered, voice breaking. "I see you." But the boy's form flickered and faded into the shadows, leaving Elias alone once more with the oppressive silence and the endless luggage that lined the train. The weight of his memories pressed down, heavy and unrelenting. As the train hurtled through the night, the boundary between past and present, memory and reality, blurred and dissolved. Elias stumbled through the carriage, clutching at phantoms, each step drawing him deeper into the labyrinth of his own soul. The whispers of the past echoed louder now, a cacophony of voices pleading, warning, condemning. He sank to the floor, head bowed, the chill of the ghostly mist wrapping around him like chains. Somewhere in the distance, the faint sound of a distant whistle pierced the darkness, a mournful call that promised no escape. Elias closed his eyes, fighting to hold onto his sanity as the train carried him further into the abyss. The journey was no longer about discovery. It was a descent, a reckoning with the shadows that dwelled within. The ghostly figures lingered, silent witnesses to his unraveling, their presence a reminder that some pasts refused to stay buried. And so, with the train's relentless motion and the haunting whispers of forgotten faces, Elias was left to wander the endless corridors of memory and regret, caught forever in the spectral grip of the midnight voyage. But somewhere deep inside, a fragile ember of hope flickered, small and faint, yet stubbornly alive. A whisper against the void, a promise that perhaps, beyond the shadows, redemption awaited. The train pressed onward, and Elias, frail and haunted, prepared to face whatever darkness lay ahead. The train car was stiflingly silent, save for the faint creak of the old wooden benches and the distant rumble of the engine awakening to life. I pressed my palm against the cold glass of the window, the chill seeping through the pane and into my skin. Outside, the platform stretched out like a barren wasteland beneath the cold gaze of the full moon. The station, abandoned and weathered, seemed suspended in an unnatural stillness, time itself frozen in a limbo between past and present. Then, from the shadows just beyond the flickering lamplight, a figure emerged. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, a silhouette cast by the moon or the mist that clung to the rails like a ghostly shroud. But as the figure stepped closer, the faint outline of a man in an old-fashioned station master's uniform became unmistakable. His face was pale, almost translucent, yet his eyes glowed with an intensity that pierced through the gloom. Station Master Harrow. He stood motionless, framed by the skeletal remains of the platform's wooden beams, his presence both haunting and commanding. I blinked, uncertain if what I was seeing was real or a fragment of my unraveling mind. Yet, there he was, silent, watchful, a sentinel of this forsaken place. I swallowed hard, my breath fogging the glass as I leaned closer. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice trembling in the heavy stillness. Harrow's lips parted, and though his voice was barely audible over the whispering wind, the words struck me like a physical blow. "Beware the journey you've begun, Elias. The train does not carry the living. It ferries souls trapped between worlds, bound by their memories and regrets. To board is to surrender to the endless night." His gaze bore into mine, filled with a sorrow that seemed to stretch across centuries. "Turn back while you still can." Before I could respond, the ghostly figure began to fade, dissolving into the mist as though he had never been there at all. The platform returned to its eerie silence, leaving me alone with the pounding of my heart and the cold bite of fear creeping down my spine. I stumbled back from the window, the weight of Harrow's words settling heavily upon me. For a moment, the boundaries of reality wavered, and I questioned everything: my purpose, my sanity, the very nature of this spectral voyage. Yet beneath the rising tide of dread, a stubborn ember of resolve sparked within me. I was here now, aboard this cursed train, and there was no turning back. Whatever awaited me in the endless night, I had to face it. The distant whistle of the engine pierced the quiet, a mournful sound that echoed through the hollow corridors of the train. It was a summons, a call to continue the journey that had already claimed so much from me. I gripped the window frame, the cold seeping into my bones, and steeled myself. The train lurched forward, its wheels grinding against the rusted rails as it slipped away from the platform and into the engulfing darkness. The station, the apparition, the warning all faded into the shadows behind me. Ahead lay the endless corridor of memories, regrets, and spectral burdens that I would have to confront. And somewhere in the depths of this nightmarish voyage lurked the truth about the train's curse and my own fate. I closed my eyes briefly, bracing against the fear that threatened to consume me. The journey was just beginning, and there was no escape. The lantern's feeble glow danced hesitantly against the cold metal walls of the carriage, casting wavering shadows that seemed to breathe with the train itself. Elias Granger knelt beside a suitcase that sat oddly apart from the rest, its surface worn and cracked, the leather straps frayed but still stubbornly intact. His fingers trembled as he unclasped the buckles, each snap echoing like a gunshot in the suffocating silence. A cold draft seeped in through the cracks in the carriage, carrying with it the faintest scent of damp earth, and something more elusive, something like distant tears. As he lifted the suitcase's lid, a murmur stirred in the darkness, a breath of air that seemed to carry 1,000 whispered sorrows. The interior of the case bloomed like a dark flower, revealing a spectral vision that unfolded before his eyes. There, in the dim light, Elias saw his family, his wife, and 2 children standing on the cracked porch of their old home. The night was thick with rain, each droplet catching the weak moonlight and fracturing it into 1,000 tears. The scene played out with agonizing clarity. The crash a sudden, shattering impact that tore through the night like a scream. The twisted metal, the shattered glass, the desperate calls that never reached him in time. His heart clenched painfully, his breath hitching as he watched the moment replayed endlessly, each second a fresh wound. The faces of his loved ones, etched in spectral light, bore the final expressions of terror and helplessness, and he felt the cold grip of guilt tightening around his soul. Tears blurred his vision as he whispered their names into the silence, his voice trembling with a mixture of love and self-reproach. "I'm sorry," he breathed, the words falling like stones into the abyss. "I should have been there. I should have saved you." A soft, almost inaudible laughter rippled through the carriage, breaking the heavy stillness. Elias looked up, startled, and there just beyond the edge of the vision stood young Elias, the glowing child from his fragmented memories. His eyes shone with innocent hope, untouched by the shadows that now consumed the man he would become. The boy reached out a tiny hand, his lips curved in a faint, bittersweet smile. "Don't forget me," the child seemed to say without words, a silent plea that clawed at Elias's heart. But as quickly as he appeared, the boy faded into the gloom, swallowed by the endless night of the train. Elias sank back onto his heels, the weight of his years pressing down like an iron shroud. Around him, the aisles overflowed with suitcases, piled high and stretching beyond sight, each one a container of memory, of regret, of pain. The oppressive emptiness of the carriage grew heavier, the silence thickening until it felt like a physical force. Elias's shadow stretched long and thin over the floor, a fragile tether to the world he had lost. His hands hovered over another suitcase, fingers tracing the cracked leather as a fresh wave of memories surged forward, mistakes, missed chances, words left unspoken. The train breathed around him, alive with the ghosts of his past. Whispers flickered at the edges of his hearing, indistinct and haunting, like the echo of a life slipping through his grasp. Elias's voice broke the silence, low and ragged as he confessed to the empty car, "I carry them with me. Every one of them, the weight, the sorrow. I cannot leave it behind." The walls seemed to pulse in response, the air growing thick with unspoken judgment and relentless despair. The endless luggage was no mere collection of belongings, it was the embodiment of his soul's torment, a prison forged from memory and regret. Each suitcase was a shard of his shattered existence, impossible to discard, impossible to escape. Yet within the crushing burden, a flicker of something else stirred a fragile thread of understanding. Elias realized that to face this weight was to face himself, and perhaps, somewhere within the endless night, there might be a path to redemption. But as the train hurtled through the eternal darkness, that path remained shrouded in shadow, uncertain and fraught with peril. He closed the suitcase gently, the echoes of his confession fading into the stillness. Rising slowly, Elias steadied himself against the cold wall, the chill seeping deep into his bones. The night was far from over, and the journey had only just begun. Somewhere down the endless corridors, the eternal passenger waited, patient and unyielding. Elias took a deep breath, the weight of the past pressing down but not yet breaking him. With trembling resolve, he moved forward into the dark, into the silence, into the unending voyage through memory and regret. "I will face you," he whispered into the void. "No matter how heavy the burden, I will face you." The train groaned in response, a mournful sound that echoed into the depths of eternity. The caretaker's room was a cramped space tucked away behind the station's main waiting area, its walls lined with peeling wallpaper that whispered of decades long past. A single oil lamp flickered on the rickety wooden table between us, casting elongated shadows that danced like reluctant spirits in the dim light. The air was thick with the scent of aged wood and stale dust, a tangible reminder of the abandonment that had claimed the station years ago. Martha Whitlock sat opposite me, her stooped form wrapped in a threadbare shawl, the sharpness of her gaze belying her weathered exterior. "You shouldn't have come here," she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken warnings. "Not on a night like this, not when the moon's full and the train's due to arrive." I swallowed hard, the silence between us stretching taut. "Why? What is it about this place?" I asked, desperation threading my words. "Why does that train come every full moon, empty of passengers but heavy with luggage?" Martha's eyes flickered to the window, where the silver moon hung low and ominous. "Because this station is a crossroads," she began, "a thin place where the veil between worlds wears thin, and the past refuses to stay buried. That train. It's not just a train. It's a vessel for souls caught in the endless journey between life and death." Her words echoed the fragments of tales I'd heard whispered by locals long ago, stories dismissed as superstition or madness. But now, standing here with her, those whispers took on a chilling clarity. "I tried to warn you," Martha continued, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and resolve. "You think I'm just an old woman clinging to ghost stories, but I've seen what lies beneath the surface of this place. The train doesn't just carry luggage, it carries pain, regrets, memories that refuse to let go." I looked at her, searching her face for any sign of jest or deceit, but found only the raw truth of experience etched into every line. "Why do you stay here?" I asked softly. "Why guard this place if it's so cursed?" She reached into her shawl, pulling out a faded photograph, its edges frayed and colors dulled by time. "Because this station was my family's life," she said, voice thick with nostalgia and sorrow. "My ancestors were the original operators, and when the curse took hold, they became bound to this place. I am the last keeper of that legacy, the one who tries to keep the darkness at bay." The photograph revealed a group of stern-faced figures standing proudly by the very platform where I now stood, a lineage intertwined with the spectral train and its endless journey. "You don't understand what you're stepping into," Martha warned, her eyes locking onto mine with fierce intensity. "This train, this station, it changes people. It takes pieces of their souls, traps them in memories they cannot escape. I've lost friends, family to its pull." Her words stirred something deep within me, a mixture of dread and melancholic introspection. The weight of her warning settled heavily on my shoulders, a burden mirrored by the endless suitcases I had already glimpsed aboard the train. "I have to know," I said finally, determination threading through my fear. "I have to face whatever this is." Martha sighed, a sound like the rustling of dead leaves. "Then you must be prepared," she said. "Because once you board, there may be no turning back." As she spoke, the station seemed to grow colder, the silence around us deepening into something almost palpable. Outside, faint echoes rippled through the night, the distant, eerie whistle of the ghostly train, a reminder that time was running out. The fragments of memory flickered in my mind, her warnings, the spectral faces, the endless suitcases, and I realized that Martha was not merely a bystander but a guardian, a keeper of painful truths. Her pragmatic kindness was a fragile shield against the encroaching darkness, a tether to the reality I was on the verge of losing. I wanted to ask more, to understand the full scope of the curse and the station's history, but the weight of the moment silenced me. Instead, I nodded, a silent promise to heed her words, even as the inexorable pull of the train beckoned. As I rose to leave, Martha placed a gnarled hand on my arm. "Remember," she whispered, "not all journeys end where you expect. Some paths lead only deeper into the shadows." Her warning echoed in my ears as I stepped back onto the platform, the moonlight casting long, eerie shadows across the cracked concrete. The ghostly train awaited, its presence both terrifying and irresistibly magnetic. I took a breath, steeling myself for the journey ahead. The past was no longer a distant memory, it was a living, breathing presence, wrapped tightly in the endless luggage that filled the spectral carriages. And Martha Whitlock's words lingered like a haunting refrain, a reminder that the station's curse was far more than legend, it was a legacy I was now entwined with, whether I wished it or not. The train's whistle pierced the night again, sharper now, closer. The platform seemed to shift beneath my feet, the boundary between the world I knew and the realm I was about to enter dissolving. With one last glance toward the caretaker's room, now shrouded in shadow, I stepped forward onto the ghostly train. The weight of Martha's legacy pressing down on me like the endless night itself. And as the doors slid shut behind me, the silence swallowed the station once more, waiting patiently for the next full moon to awaken the endless journey he knew. The soft, almost imperceptible glow of the compartment's dim light was the first thing Elias noticed as he wandered deeper into the ghostly train. It was a pale bluish shimmer, like the faint pulse of a distant star struggling against the vastness of night. Drawn to it, he moved cautiously, the creak of his footsteps against the worn wooden floorboards sounding impossibly loud in the oppressive silence. There, seated on a cracked wooden bench dusted with decades of neglect, was a small boy. Elias' breath hitched. He recognized the figure instantly. It was himself, but not the haunted conductor who had boarded this spectral vessel hours ago. This was young Elias, his innocent self, bathed in a fragile, ethereal light that made his old-fashioned clothes ripple, as if caught in a gentle breeze. The boy's eyes were wide and hopeful, gazing out the window at a landscape that flickered like a dream, fields of wildflowers under a silver moon, distant hills rolling softly into shadow. For a moment, the weight of the years seemed to lift from Elias's shoulders, replaced by a bittersweet ache that twisted deep in his chest. "I'm here," Elias whispered, voice barely audible, yet somehow the boy seemed to hear. He turned slowly, eyes meeting those of his older self. No words passed between them, only the silent communion of two souls separated by time yet bound by memory. But the moment was fragile. The edges of the compartment began to blur and ripple, the walls bending like water disturbed by a stone. Elias reached out, desperate to hold onto this shard of his past, but the boy slipped away, fading into a mist that coiled and twisted like smoke. The corridor beyond seemed to breathe and warp as Elias pursued the fading light, his heart pounding in his ears. The narrow passage bent impossibly, stretching and folding in on itself, a labyrinth of memories and regrets where time held no meaning. "Don't go," Elias pleaded, his voice cracking with desperation. "Stay with me." But young Elias was a fleeting echo, always just beyond reach. Each attempt to grasp the child only deepened the emptiness inside, a hollow cavern echoing with lost laughter and silent tears. As the train glided forward, its eerie hum filling the dark spaces, Elias felt the walls close in. The spectral echoes of his childhood joyful cries, whispered secrets, the soft rustle of leaves in a summer breeze swirled around him, indistinguishable from the creeping shadows that haunted his waking nightmare. He collapsed against a cold metal wall, breath ragged, eyes wide with a mixture of sorrow and fear. The boundary between memory and reality had thinned, and he was slipping. The train was no longer just a vessel for his past. It was becoming a prison of his own making, its corridors endless, its silence deafening. Yet, even in the midst of this unraveling, a fragile thread of hope remained, a faint, glowing presence that whispered of redemption. If only he could find the strength to follow it. The journey was far from over, and as the train plunged deeper into the night, Elias knew that the echoes of his childhood would continue to haunt him, guiding and tormenting him in equal measure. The question was whether he could survive the haunting embrace of his own past, or if the ghostly vessel would claim him forever. "Hold on," he murmured to the fading light. "Hold on just a little longer." And with that, the endless corridor stretched before him once more, a twisting path of memories and shadows leading him further into the heart of the nightmare. The train whispered on, its haunting melody weaving through the darkness, a lullaby for the lost and the damned. Elias Granger was not yet ready to surrender, but the shadows were closing in. The train's air was thick with a chill that seemed to seep into my bones as I pushed open the creaking door, leading deeper into the ghostly vessel. Before me stretched a narrow corridor, impossibly long, so long that its end vanished into an indistinct haze of shadows and dim, wavering light. Both walls were lined shoulder to shoulder with suitcases. Not a single gap interrupted their ranks. They stood like silent sentinels, each a repository of some forgotten fragment of my life. I swallowed a dry lump in my throat and stepped forward, feeling the oppressive weight of the emptiness pressing down on me. The floor beneath my feet creaked faintly, a hollow echo in the vast silence. I ran my hand along the nearest case, its leather rough and cracked, the metal clasp rusted yet somehow still holding fast. Almost immediately, whispers began to swirl around me, a faint susurration of voices, memories, and half-remembered feelings. The air prickled with a spectral energy, as if the suitcases themselves breathed in the dark, exhaling fragments of the past into the cold atmosphere. Images flickered before my eyes like the flickering of an old film reel. A boy laughing beneath a sun-dappled tree, a woman's face blurred by tears. A train whistle, distant and mournful, calling across the years. I staggered back, gasping, the air thick with the scent of leather, dust, and something more elusive, loss, perhaps, or regret. With every step, the corridor stretched on, endless and unyielding. Time seemed to warp here. Moments from decades ago rushed forward, blending with the present in a terrifying fusion. I felt the hollowness inside me deepen, mirroring the emptiness surrounding me. This was no mere train, it was a vessel ferrying my soul through an eternal night. A chill brushed my neck, and I spun around, heart pounding. At the periphery of my vision, a shadow shifted, amorphous, flickering between human and something less definable. The eternal passenger. I couldn't see its face clearly. It was as if the darkness itself had taken shape, molding into a figure of dread and despair. It loomed there, just out of reach, an ever-present reminder of the burden I bore. "You cannot run," it whispered, the voice a sibilant echo inside my mind. "Each regret, each sorrow, each lost moment is yours to carry," I swallowed hard. The suitcases, my memories, lined the corridor endlessly, a prison constructed from my own past. I wanted to scream, to break free, but the silence swallowed my voice. My hands trembled as I touched a case marked by a faded tag, the handwriting unmistakably mine. Inside, I glimpsed a moment of betrayal, a choice that had fractured my life. The corridor seemed to pulse, the suitcases vibrating in time with my racing heartbeat. I realized then that this place was not static. It was alive, shaped by my emotions, my fears, my endless regrets. The train was both my sanctuary and my cage. I pressed forward, each step heavier than the last, the endless corridor stretching infinitely ahead and behind. Somewhere in the distance, a faint light flickered, a promise or a mirage. I could not tell. The weight of eternity settled on my shoulders as the shadows lengthened and the whispering voices grew louder. Was this truly my fate? To wander these endless halls, forever trapped between what was and what could never be? The question clawed at my mind, relentless and unforgiving. Yet beneath the blanket of despair, a fragile ember of resolve flickered. If this was my prison, then I would face it. I would confront the memories, the regrets, the shadows that haunted me. The journey was far from over, and somewhere deep within the endless corridor, I sensed the key to my salvation, or my doom awaited. The train creaked forward into the night, and I took another step into the unknown, the endless corridor of my soul stretching before me like a dark river of memories and shadows. The air inside the compartment thickened as the train hummed softly beneath the spectral moonlight filtering through the grimy windows. I stepped cautiously forward, the flickering shadows playing tricks on my eyes. The endless rows of suitcases seemed suddenly oppressive, their silent presence pressing down on me like a physical weight. My hands trembled as I reached out toward a battered leather case, but before I could touch it, the temperature in the car dropped sharply, a cold so deep it seemed to seep into my bones. From the darkest corner of the carriage, a shape began to coalesce, a shadow at first, amorphous and shifting, then slowly taking on form. The figure was unlike any I had seen before, a silhouette with human features that twisted and morphed, never settling into a fixed shape. It was as if the darkness itself had taken breath and spoken. My breath caught in my throat. Every instinct screamed to flee, but my feet were rooted to the floor. "Who are you?" I managed to whisper, my voice trembling in the oppressive stillness. The figure responded, not with words but a chorus of voices layered one upon another. Some were my own, echoing memories of sorrow and regret. Others were distant, foreign, yet deeply familiar. The eternal passenger had arrived. It drifted closer, shifting features contorting into faces. I recognized faces of those I had loved and lost, faces that bore the weight of my failures. The air grew dense with accusation and despair, and I felt the crushing pressure of every regret and fear I had ever tried to bury. "You cannot run," it whispered, a voice both mine and not mine. "This journey is yours. The luggage you carry is the sum of your soul." I staggered back, my mind racing. How could this entity embody my deepest fears? Was it a punishment, a reflection, or the embodiment of my very self? The train rattled beneath me, as if responding to the growing tempest within my chest. Desperation clawed at me. "There has to be a way out," I said, my voice firmer despite the terror. "I won't be trapped forever." The eternal passenger laughed, a sound like dry leaves rustling in a graveyard wind. "Escape is an illusion. Here, time folds, past and future merge. You are bound to this endless voyage." As the words sank in, the corridor of suitcases around us began to warp and twist, stretching into infinity, the edges of reality blurring into nightmare. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. I was caught between worlds, tethered by memories too heavy to bear yet too precious to relinquish. The figure advanced, reaching out with hands that flickered between solid and smoke. I felt a cold touch brush my cheek, and a flood of images overwhelmed me, scenes of my childhood, my family, moments of joy and pain, all drowning me in a tide of emotion. But beneath the terror, a spark of defiance kindled. "I am not just my regrets," I whispered fiercely. "I am more than this endless baggage." The eternal passenger hesitated, the shifting face flickering uncertainly. For a moment, the oppressive weight lightened, and the train seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a final echoing whisper, the figure receded back into the shadows, leaving me alone amid the infinite luggage once more. The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the steady, haunting rhythm of the wheels on the rails. I sank to the floor, heart pounding, aware that this encounter had changed everything. The train was no longer just a vessel of memories, it was a battleground for my very soul. And the eternal passenger was no mere ghost. It was the embodiment of all I feared and loathed within myself. Yet, as darkness pressed in around me, a fragile thread of hope endured. The fight was far from over. I would have to face the endless journey ahead, not as a victim, but as a man determined to reclaim his own soul. Outside, the moon hung low and full, casting its pale light through the windows, bathing the ghostly train in an otherworldly glow. The spectral voyage continued, and I was trapped aboard, caught in the eternal dance of memory, fear, and the desperate yearning for redemption. The night stretched on, endless and unyielding. But somewhere in the shadows, I sensed a possibility, a crack in the darkness, where light might one day seep through. Until then, the eternal passenger waited, and the journey pressed relentlessly onward. I closed my eyes, steeling myself for what was to come, knowing that the next step could lead to salvation or oblivion. And as the train hurtled through the mist-shrouded void, I whispered a silent vow. I would not surrender to the darkness without a fight. The first encounter with the eternal passenger had marked the true beginning of my nightmare. Now, the question remained, how long could I endure the weight of eternity before it crushed me utterly? And with that thought, the train plunged deeper into the night, the endless corridor of luggage stretching into infinity, carrying me further along the path from which there was no clear return. Between life and death the carriage was silent but for the faint, rhythmic tapping of Elias' own breath, shallow and uneven in the cold air. He stood motionless, the hollow echo of his footsteps swallowed by the vast emptiness of the ghostly train. The walls around him shimmered faintly, as though the very fabric of reality was folding inward, distorting and bending in impossible ways. Time itself seemed to ripple, a slow undulation that pulled at the edges of his consciousness, threatening to tear it apart. He reached out a trembling hand to steady himself against one of the cold metal poles, his fingers grazing the surface as if it might anchor him to something real. But the sensation was fleeting, like trying to grasp a wisp of smoke. Around him, the endless corridor stretched, the rows of suitcases crowding the aisles as they always did. But tonight the air was heavy with a presence he could no longer deny. The shadows at the edges of his vision flickered unnervingly, twisting into vague shapes that whispered fragments of memories, snatches of laughter, cries, and long-forgotten promises. He blinked hard, trying to clear the haze clouding his mind, but it only deepened. A cold dread sank into his bones, icy and relentless. "This isn't just a train," he murmured to himself, voice cracking in the oppressive silence. "It's something else." From the darkness ahead, a figure began to materialize in amorphous shape, shifting and writhing, its human features barely discernible beneath the swirling shadows. The eternal passenger. Elias's heart surged with a mixture of terror and grim recognition. He had seen this spectre before, lurking just beyond the periphery of his thoughts, a manifestation of every regret, every fear that had haunted him since the tragedy that claimed his family. The figure's face twisted into a silent snarl, eyes like black voids accusing him. Slowly, it extended a hand, and the myriad suitcases around them burst open with a sudden, eerie explosion of light and sound. Spectral images poured forth, visions of Elias's life splintered into fragments, the carefree laughter of childhood, the tender smile of a lost love, the agonizing moments of failure and loss. They swirled around the carriage in a ghostly dance, illuminating the darkness with their haunting glow. Elias staggered back, overwhelmed by the flood of memories that were at once his own and yet felt alien in their intensity. He spoke aloud, voice trembling. "Why? Why am I here? What is this place?" The eternal passenger remained silent, but its presence pressed down on him like a suffocating weight. It was the embodiment of his guilt, his sorrow, the unbearable burden of a life cut short by tragedy and haunted by what-ifs. In the dim corner, a faint glow caught Elias's eye. There, standing quietly, was the spectral form of young Elias himself as a child, innocent and hopeful. Dressed in old-fashioned clothes that shimmered softly in the ghostly light. The boy's eyes were wide, filled with a silent plea that knotted Elias's heart. Young Elias pointed toward the horizon beyond the train's window, where a pale, fragile light struggled to pierce the eternal night. It was a glimmer of something distant, hope, perhaps, or redemption. Elias reached out, but the vision flickered and faded before he could touch it. The train lurched suddenly, the sensation of movement returning with a jolt, though the windows revealed only endless darkness. Time fractured completely. Moments from his past, present, and possible futures collided and overlapped in a dizzying kaleidoscope. He saw himself laughing as a boy, mourning as a man, and standing here now, each version a ghost trapped in the same endless journey. His mind reeled as the boundaries between reality, memory, and nightmare dissolved. The train hurtled forward through a void where seconds stretched into eternity and eternity collapsed into a single breath. Elias clung desperately to the remnants of his sanity, even as they slipped through his fingers like grains of sand. "Am I alive? Am I dead?" He whispered into the void, the questions echoing unanswered. The eternal passenger loomed closer, its voice a whisper inside his head, cold and merciless. "You are neither. You are the journey itself, an endless passage through the corridors of your soul." A shudder passed through Elias, the full weight of his predicament crashing down upon him. He was trapped not in a train, but in the liminal space between life and death, between memory and oblivion. The endless luggage was not just baggage. It was the sum of his regrets, his failures, the parts of himself he could never shed. Yet, amid the crushing despair, a flicker of defiance sparked within him. If this was his fate, then he would face it head-on. He would confront the darkness, the shadows of his past, and the haunting presence that sought to claim him. The train's slow, spectral journey continued, but Elias no longer felt like a passive passenger. He was a conductor still of memories, of fears, of the very essence of his being. As the carriage plunged deeper into the endless night, the question remained, could he break free from this eternal voyage? Or was he doomed to ride forever between life and death, a ghost trapped by his own soul? The silence returned, heavy and profound, broken only by the distant, rhythmic clatter of the rails, a sound both terrifying and strangely comforting. Elias steeled himself. Tomorrow, or perhaps never, he would meet his fate. But for now, he was still here, still moving forward on the train that carried him between worlds. And the journey was far from over. The cold air of the train's interior seemed to thicken, coiling around me like a suffocating blanket. Shadows stretched and warped, flickering with unnatural life, as if the very walls breathed in tandem with the endless procession of memories locked within the suitcases. The eternal passenger materialized before me, an amorphous silhouette whose form shifted in and out of focus, a living nightmare woven from smoke and sorrow. Its voice was a whisper, yet it echoed inside my mind with crushing clarity. "You carry it all," it said, voice like the rustle of dead leaves. "Every choice, every regret, every lost moment. You cannot run from what you are." I swallowed hard, the weight of years pressing down on my chest. The suitcases around me pulsed faintly, as if alive, and I could hear the faint murmurs of the past leaking through their seams. Memories, half-remembered and fragmented, surged forward unbidden. I saw a sunlit afternoon, laughter spilling across a garden where my family once gathered. The faces were bright with joy, but beneath the surface lay a dark undercurrent, a shadow of the tragedy that would rend them from me forever. I reached out, but the image shattered like glass, leaving only the cold sting of guilt. "Why show me this?" I whispered, voice hoarse and trembling. The eternal passenger's form shifted, becoming more solid yet no less terrifying. "Because you must bear it. The burden of your past is your prison and your path. Accept it or be consumed." I sank to my knees, the floor beneath me cold and unyielding. The faces of my lost loved ones emerged from the mist, their eyes hollow yet accusing. I begged, pleaded for a reprieve, but the silence that answered was heavier than any condemnation. I was alone in this endless corridor, surrounded by echoes of a life I could never reclaim. A tendril of darkness snaked from the eternal passenger, wrapping around my heart with a coldness that seeped into my bones. The choice was laid bare before me: surrender to the eternal cycle, accepting the weight of every memory and regret, or fight to escape a path fraught with the risk of oblivion or worse. The train creaked and groaned as if alive, the sound a mournful lament for souls trapped in limbo. I felt the emptiness inside me swell, mirroring the vast, unending corridors lined with my own burdens. Yet beneath the despair flickered a fragile ember, the faintest glimmer of hope that perhaps, through acceptance, there might be a way to reclaim some semblance of peace. "I will carry it," I whispered, voice steadying despite the storm inside. "I will face it all." The eternal passenger paused, its form shimmering with an eerie light. "So be it," it intoned, voice fading like a distant bell tolling. "Your journey continues." As the shadows receded, the train lurched forward, plunging deeper into the endless night. I rose slowly, the cold replaced by a hollow warmth that spread through me. The burden remained, heavy as ever, but for the first time, I felt the faint stirrings of resolve. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with darkness and despair, but I was no longer running. And yet, as the endless procession of memories awaited behind each suitcase, a question lingered in the air: was acceptance a surrender or a salvation? The train carried me onward, deeper into the corridors of my soul, where the past and present collided in an eternal dance of dread and hope. With a steadying breath, I stepped forward, ready to confront whatever lay beyond the next door, knowing that my fate was entwined with the endless journey itself. The night stretched on, infinite and silent, as the train hurtled through the shadows, a vessel of memory, regret, and the fragile possibility of redemption. The burden was mine to bear, and the road was long, but I would face it, one suitcase at a time. The air in the caretaker's office was thick with dust and silence, broken only by the faint creaks of the old wooden floor beneath Elias's boots. He stood motionless, staring at the faded photographs pinned to the corkboard images of a young woman, whose eyes held a fierce determination that seemed to reach across the decades. Martha Whitlock. The very name echoed in the hollow chamber of the station, a whisper of a past that refused to die. As Elias ran his fingers along the cracked edge of an ancient ledger resting on the desk, a sudden chill swept through the room. The shadows deepened, and with them, the faint shimmer of spectral light coalesced into a figure young Martha, her face alight with a mix of hope and sorrow. She moved silently, her hands meticulously tending to the station's worn walls and broken windows, as if trying to stave off the relentless decay that threatened to swallow the place whole. Elias's breath caught Martha. The apparition turned, her gaze piercing. Though her lips did not move, the weight of her unspoken words pressed heavily upon him. He saw in her eyes the burden of decades spent bound to this forsaken station, a guardian not by choice, but by ancient pact. She had sacrificed her freedom, her very soul, to hold back the train's curse, to keep the boundary between the living world and the eternal journey intact. Scenes unfolded like a haunting film, Martha confronting the spectral midnight train time and again, her voice trembling yet resolute as she warned travelers away. Each warning was a plea, a desperate attempt to prevent others from boarding the ghostly vessel that carried not passengers, but the endless luggage of souls trapped in limbo. Elias felt the weight of her legacy settle on his shoulders. "Why didn't you tell me?" he whispered, the words lost in the thickening silence. The vision shifted. Martha's younger self stood at the edge of the platform, hands clasped tightly around a weathered talisman. The station seemed alive, groaning under the strain of unseen forces. Her eyes flickered with pain as the train's eerie whistle pierced the night, a sound that promised endless torment. "I tried," the apparition's presence seemed to say. "But some journeys cannot be stopped, only endured." As the vision faded, Elias was left alone with the ledger, its pages yellowed but legible. His fingers traced the careful script, records of sacrifices made, of souls lost and saved, and a solemn vow to guard the threshold no matter the cost. The knowledge was both a beacon and a shackle. Outside, the night wind whispered through the broken panes, carrying the faint echo of a train's distant whistle. Elias stepped onto the platform, the spectral mist curling around him like fingers of smoke. The shadow of Martha lingered a moment longer, a silent sentinel fading into the darkness. He was no longer just a conductor caught between worlds. He was a bearer of Martha's legacy, a reluctant guardian now entwined in the eternal curse. The station no longer felt empty. It pulsed with the memories of sacrifice and the relentless passage of time. Elias swallowed hard, the chill of the night biting deeper. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with dread and the unyielding weight of memory. But now, armed with the truth of Martha's sacrifice, he faced the endless journey with a solemn resolve. The train would come again, as it always did, laden with the burdens of eternity. And when it did, Elias would be there not just as a conductor, but as a keeper of the fragile boundary between life and the endless night. He must endure. He must remember. And perhaps, in the depths of that eternal voyage, there might yet be a flicker of redemption. The station creaked once more, a living testament to the past and the future entwined. Elias turned away from the platform, the weight of Martha's legacy settling like a mantle upon his shoulders. The ghostly train's whistle echoed faintly, a call to the unknown, and the journey continued. The train groaned a low, mournful sound that seemed to echo from the very bones of the ancient carriages. Elias Granger staggered forward, his breath ragged and uneven, every step an effort, as if the floor itself pulled him down into shadow. The corridors stretched endlessly, walls breathing like living things, pulsing with a sickly vitality that made his skin crawl. Whispered voices flickered at the edges of his hearing, fragments of laughter, cries and half-formed words that twisted into a cacophony of regret. He pressed one trembling hand against the warped wood paneling, fingers sinking slightly into the surface as it rippled beneath his touch. "No," he muttered, voice cracked and raw. "This isn't real, it can't be." But the whispers only grew louder, weaving themselves into a suffocating symphony of memory and agony. Faces flickered in the darkness, his mother's gentle smile, his wife's tear-streaked face, his children's innocent eyes, each one twisted by time and pain. Morphing in and out of focus like smoke, ahead, the dim light of a lantern cast long shadows down the corridor. Elias blinked, and there at the far end stood the glowing figure of young Elias, small and radiant in the gloom. The boy's eyes held a silent plea, a haunting invitation to reclaim something lost long ago. Elias reached out, his heart pounding, but before his fingers could close the distance, the apparition flickered, dissolved into a swirl of darkness, and vanished. A chill swept through the car, and from the shadows emerged the eternal passenger. Its form shifted and roiled, a mass of shadow with fleeting human features, some familiar, some grotesquely distorted. The faces twisted into those of people Elias had loved and lost, their eyes accusing, their mouths silent but screaming in his mind. "Why do you resist?" The entity breathed, voice like the rustling of dead leaves. "This journey is your own. You cannot escape the weight you carry." Elias staggered back, madness creeping at the edges of his consciousness. "I won't be trapped," he whispered fiercely, clutching his head as visions collided, ghostly laughter, screams, the whistle of the wind through the station. The boundaries between nightmare and reality crumbled beneath his feet. In the midst of the chaos, a faint, familiar voice cut through the darkness. "Remember, Elias," it said softly, "the path is never as fixed as it seems." He turned, heart leaping. There, on the platform outside the window, stood Station Master Harrow, his spectral figure blurred but unmistakable. His eyes, filled with a sorrowful wisdom, met Elias. "You must choose," the apparition whispered before fading like mist. Elias sank to his knees, breath heaving. The endless train, the endless suitcases, the endless memories, they were all fragments of his fractured soul. The line between what was and what might be wavered like a fragile thread. And still, the train moved onward into the night, carrying him deeper into the labyrinth of his mind, where every step threatened to unravel the last shreds of his sanity. He looked up, eyes wild but resolute. "I will find a way," he vowed, voice breaking yet fierce. "I have to." But whether that way led to freedom or oblivion, the train had yet to reveal. The endless journey continued, and with it, the fracturing of Elias Granger's very self. The carriage around me seemed to breathe. The walls no longer held firm contours but rippled and shifted like reflections on disturbed water. I staggered forward, hands pressing against the metallic surface that warped beneath my touch, melting one moment into another. I was no longer just a man aboard a ghostly train. I was a traveler lost in the folds of time itself. At first, it was subtle. The ticking of a clock somewhere in the distance grew erratic, a warped echo bouncing off the endless rows of suitcases that crowded the aisles. Then the air thickened with a strange resonance, a symphony of memories converging. I blinked and suddenly I was standing not only in the present but also in the past and future simultaneously. To my left, the faint glow of a lantern illuminated a small boy in old-fashioned clothes, standing at the edge of a platform under a cold, grey sky. His eyes, my eyes, were wide with innocence and hope. Young Elias, a spectral echo of who I once was, watched silently, his faint glow flickering like a candle threatened by a storm. Behind me, the distant wail of a train whistle morphed into the anguished cries of a night long ago. I glimpsed the shattered wreckage of a deadly crash, the twisted metal and smoke billowing against a cruel sky. Faces blurred in the smoke, my family, their expressions frozen in time, forever caught in the moment before disaster claimed them. The floor beneath my feet trembled, and the carriage stretched out endlessly ahead, a corridor folding back upon itself like some impossible embius strip. Each step I took echoed into infinity, the sound multiplying and distorting until it was a cacophony of overlapping footsteps, laughter, and sobs. I clutched my head, trying to hold on to anything that would anchor me to reality. But the past seeped into the present, and the present blurred into moments yet to come. Time was no longer linear. It was a tangled web, imprisoning me in an eternal loop of memory and regret. The spectral boy appeared beside me, his small hand reaching out. I hesitated, then grasped it, the cold touch sending a jolt through my spine. His eyes searched mine, filled with silent questions and unspoken longing. In that fragile connection, I felt a flicker of warmth, a fleeting reminder that not all was lost, but the warmth was short-lived. From the shadows emerged a dark shape, shifting and amorphous, the eternal passenger. Its form flickered between human and something else, a nightmare given shape by my own subconscious fears. It whispered in voices that were my own and not my own, a chorus of regrets and despair. "You cannot escape," it intoned, its voice a hollow echo. "This journey is endless, and the luggage you carry is the weight of your soul." The carriage groaned, metal twisting and bending as if the train itself was alive and struggling against some unseen force. The air grew heavier, pressing down on me with the weight of eternity. My breath came in ragged gasps, heart pounding against ribs that felt too fragile to contain it. I tried to move forward, to find a door or a window that led back to the station, back to the world I knew. But the corridor stretched endlessly, each step taking me further into the abyss of time's collapse. Past, present, and future flickered like broken frames of a movie reel, disjointed and overlapping. In the distance, voices called out some familiar, others distorted beyond recognition. The laughter of my childhood mingled with the sobs of loss and the silent screams of fear. Every sound was a thread pulling me deeper into the tangled fabric of this spectral voyage. I sank to my knees, overwhelmed by the sheer weight of existence compressed into this single carriage. The emptiness inside me mirrored the void outside, the endless night pressing in from every side. "Why am I trapped here?" I whispered, voice breaking. Young Elias looked up at me, eyes glowing softly with a sadness that transcended words. For a moment, I saw not just my past, but the possibility of a future, a sliver of hope hidden beneath the layers of torment. But the eternal passenger loomed closer, its presence a suffocating reminder that time here was no friend, only a cruel jailer. As the train lurched forward, the walls around me blurred again, and the corridor twisted into another impossible shape. I was caught in the endless flux, a prisoner of my own memories, and the eternal journey that stretched before me like an unending night. And yet, despite the despair, a tiny spark of defiance stirred within. If time was fluid, perhaps I could bend it. If the journey was eternal, maybe there was a path through the darkness yet. I rose slowly to my feet, heart pounding with fearful hope, ready to face whatever lay ahead in the swirling vortex of time and memory. The train was moving, and so was I, whether towards salvation or oblivion, I could not say. The endless night awaited, and with it, the next fragment of my life to unravel. The carriage was dimly lit, the only illumination coming from the faint, ghostly glow that seemed to seep from the endless pile of suitcases surrounding me. Their surfaces shimmered with a spectral light, as if each case held a tiny inferno of memories trapped beneath worn leather and rusted clasps. The air was thick and stale, punctuated by the soft creaking of the train's ancient bones as it hurtled through a night that had no dawn. I stood in the center, overwhelmed by the sheer weight of the luggage pressing in from every side, an ocean of my own past ready to drown me. I reached out, fingers trembling, and grasped the nearest suitcase. It was heavier than it looked, its leather cool and slick beneath my touch. A whisper brushed my ear, so faint I could almost convince myself it was the wind. But it was not the wind. It was the echo of a voice I knew too well, the voice of regret. Suddenly, the suitcase's clasp gave way with a sharp click. The lid creaked open, and a swirling vortex of memories erupted forth. I was plunged into a torrent of images, laughter from a sunlit afternoon, The piercing cry of loss, the sting of mistakes made and chances forever lost. Faces flickered, some smiling, some twisted with pain. Among them a small boy appeared, myself years ago, glowing faintly in the dimness, eyes wide with innocence and hope. "Why do you linger here?" The boy seemed to ask, his gaze silent but pleading. Before I could answer, a shadow detached itself from the darkness at the far end of the carriage. The eternal passenger had come. Its form was fluid, shifting grotesquely between faces I recognized and nightmares I had buried deep. Its voice was a cacophony of despair and accusation. "You cannot escape," it whispered, each word a blade. "These burdens are yours, carried through time, through death, through eternity. You are bound to this journey, conductor. Forever." I staggered back, the suffocating presence of the figure overwhelming. But a flicker of defiance sparked within me. "No," I said, voice raw but steady. "I am not just my regrets. I am more." The figure wavered, the faces distorting in fury and confusion. Around us the luggage seemed to pulse, alive with the fragments of my soul. I realized then that each suitcase was more than a vessel for memory. They were shards of my identity scattered through time. Pieces of a self I had long tried to forget. The train car stretched endlessly before me, the corridor lined with luggage that faded into the shadows. I tried to move forward, but the weight of the past pressed down like a physical force, the shadows tightening their grip. My breath caught in my throat, caught between despair and the fragile spark of hope that I could still reclaim my soul. "Elias," a whisper called softly from the depths of the memory vortex. I turned to see the young version of myself, eyes shining with an impossible light. For a brief moment, the oppressive darkness lifted, replaced by a bittersweet glimpse of redemption. But the eternal passenger's growl shattered the moment, dragging me back into the abyss. The journey was far from over, and the train would not release me easily. As the carriage plunged deeper into the night, I knew one thing with terrifying clarity. The revelations I had uncovered were only the beginning. The true test lay ahead, whether I could wrest control from the endless shadows or be consumed by them forever. And somewhere in the distance, the night waited, patient and eternal. The carriage was shrouded in a dim light, the kind that seemed almost borrowed from another world. Moonbeams filtered faintly through the fogged and cracked windows, casting a silver pallor across the worn, threadbare upholstery. The air was thick with the scent of old leather and damp wood, mingling with the faint metallic tang of the train's iron bones. I stood there, every nerve taut, heart beating against the cage of my ribs like a desperate prisoner. The endless night outside felt less a backdrop and more a living presence, a vast and hungry void pressing in from all sides. Then, through the shifting gloom, I saw him. A small figure, bathed in a faint, otherworldly glow, stood quietly by the window. His clothes were old-fashioned and ill-fitting jacket, knickerbockers, and scuffed shoes, and his eyes held the wide, unguarded innocence of youth. It was me. Or rather, the me I had been, a fragment of my past brought to spectral life. Young Elias. The name whispered itself in my mind before I could even speak it aloud. The child's gaze met mine, silent but somehow speaking volumes, a mirror reflecting not just who I was, but who I had lost. For a moment, the crushing weight of the luggage, the suffocating emptiness of the train, and the cold clutch of regret all seemed to loosen their grip. Hope flickered like a fragile flame in the cavernous darkness. I stepped forward, the wooden floor creaking beneath my boots. My voice was barely a whisper, cracked with emotion. "Is it really you?" The child did not answer, but the faintest smile curved his lips. A gesture so small yet so profound, it pierced the veil of dread that had cloaked my soul for so long. Around us, the train's oppressive silence was broken by a distant, haunting melody, a lullaby, soft and ethereal, winding its way through the carriages like a ghostly caress. The sound carried memories of gentler times, when life had not yet been rent by loss and guilt. As I reached out, my hand trembling, to touch the glowing figure, a warmth bloomed through my fingertips, a brief and precious connection bridging decades and despair. But the moment was fleeting. The shadows, patient and merciless, began to creep back, swirling like smoke around the edges of the carriage. The spectral light of young Elias wavered, flickering as if caught in a violent storm. The darkness was relentless, a tidal wave that threatened to swallow the fragile hope whole. I felt it pressing against my skin, cold and suffocating, a reminder that the journey was far from over. Clutching a small, worn toy train I had found earlier among the endless luggage, a relic of a happier past, I whispered a promise. "I won't forget you. I won't let this darkness win." The words felt heavy and uncertain, but for the first time in what felt like an eternity, they carried a flicker of resolve. The train rumbled forward, the wheels clattering against the rails in a rhythm both ancient and eternal. Outside, the endless night stretched on, vast and unyielding. Inside, amidst the shadows and silence, a faint light lingered, still a glimpse of redemption, a sliver of peace, fragile yet defiant. As the carriage faded into darkness once more, I knew that this moment of grace would not last. The journey ahead promised torment and despair, but also the faint possibility of reconciliation. For the first time, I dared to hope that somewhere beyond the endless corridors of memory and regret, I might find a way home. And so, with the echoes of a lullaby ringing in my ears, and the glow of my younger self fading into the night, I stepped deeper into the unknown, ready to face whatever awaited beyond the veil. The air inside the train car thickened, a palpable weight pressing against my chest. Shadows flickered erratically over the cracked walls, as if the very darkness itself was alive, breathing and watching. Then it came, the eternal passenger, no longer a faint whisper or distant shadow, but a looming, amorphous figure that shifted and morphed before my eyes. Its form twisted between human features and something utterly alien, a grotesque mask of shifting faces, none of them truly whole. A low, guttural whisper began to crawl into my mind, words unspoken but felt like icy needles piercing through the fragile membrane of my sanity. "You cannot escape," it hissed, voices overlapping in a chorus of despair. The train car shuddered, lights flickering violently, casting grotesque shapes that danced on the walls like wailing specters. I stumbled back, heart hammering, every instinct screaming to flee, yet my feet remained rooted to the spot. Around me, the endless suitcases lined the corridor, their surfaces rippling unnaturally, as if beneath their polished leather skins, something alive writhed. One by one, they began to open, revealing scenes that clawed at my soul, visions of failure, loss, and regret played out in horrifying detail. The metallic scent of blood hung in the air, mingling with a cold, biting chill that seemed to seep through my very bones. In the midst of this nightmare, a soft glow appeared beside me, a fragile light in the darkness. It was him, young Elias, my innocent self, the boy I once was. Silent and still, his eyes held a pleading sorrow, a wordless reminder of hope long buried beneath years of grief and self-recrimination. I reached out, desperate for that glimmer of light, but the darkness surged back with renewed fury. The eternal passenger lunged forward, its form fracturing the thin veil separating nightmare from reality. The train shook violently. Windows rattled as spectral wails echoed through the carriages. I screamed, a raw sound of defiance and anguish, fighting against the overwhelming tide of despair that threatened to swallow me whole. My mind teetered on the edge, caught between surrender and resistance. The train's eerie atmosphere tightened like a noose, the emptiness inside me swelling, threatening to consume every shred of hope. Yet, despite the oppressive darkness, a flicker of determination burned within, a stubborn refusal to let the shadows claim me without a fight. As the night pressed on, the battle raged within and without, a torment that transcended time and space. The eternal passenger, embodiment of my deepest fears and regrets, sought to drag me into eternal oblivion. But somewhere deep inside, the fragile light of young Elias' silent plea anchored me, a tenuous thread connecting me to what I once was, and what I might still become. The shadows deepened, but so did my resolve. The endless journey stretched before me, haunted and uncertain, yet I would not yield, not yet. Somewhere beyond the darkness, perhaps redemption awaited, or at least the courage to face whatever came next. And so I stood, trembling and defiant, the ghostly train hurtling through the eternal night, caught between nightmare and the faintest hope of dawn. The air inside the carriage was thick, heavy, as if the countless memories folded into those endless rows of suitcases pressed down on Elias's chest, refusing to be ignored any longer. He stood motionless, the dim glow of the carriage's ghostly lanterns casting long, wavering shadows that stretched off into an impossible distance. The suitcases were everywhere, piled high and stretching beyond sight, a labyrinth of his own life's regrets and lost moments. Each worn leather handle and fraying zipper was a thread tangled into the tapestry of who he had been, who he was, and who he might never become. A cold silence enveloped him, broken only by the faint creaking of the spectral train's frame as it hurtled through the void between worlds. Elias's breath came shallow and quick. His heart hammered against his ribs like a desperate prisoner seeking escape. Somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered, a voice that was not his but born from the darkest recesses of his soul. The eternal passenger had come. From the shadows emerged the shifting form, a silhouette that flickered and warped as if struggling to hold shape. Human features appeared and dissolved, a face twisted in agony, a fleeting smile of regret, eyes hollowed by despair. It was all Elias, yet none of it truly him. The eternal passenger spoke in a voice like wind rustling through dead leaves, its words slithering into his mind. You cannot run from what you carry. This journey is yours alone. Elias swallowed the lump rising in his throat. Why me? Why this endless road? Because you are the sum of your memories, the shadow hissed. The weight of your choices, your guilt, your love, all trapped within this train, bound to you for eternity. The carriage seemed to tilt, reality bending around him. Elias's gaze dropped to the floor, where a soft glow began to pulse. From the light, a small figure emerged, young Elias, the spectral child of his past, eyes wide and innocent, a faint smile flickering on his lips. The boy said nothing but extended a trembling hand, a fragile beacon of hope piercing the suffocating darkness. Elias reached out, his fingers brushing the translucent skin. Memories flooded back, laughter in sunlit fields, the warmth of a mother's embrace, the freedom of childhood unburdened by sorrow. For a moment, the crushing weight lifted, replaced by a bitter-sweet ache of what once was and could never be again. But the shadow loomed larger, its presence swallowing the light. You must decide, it whispered. Embrace the endless journey, accept your fate as the conductor of memories eternal, or fight to break free, risking oblivion, the erasure of all that you are. The train trembled as if sensing the gravity of the choice. Time folded and fractured. Past, present, and future collided in a dizzying storm of colors and sounds. The carriage became a vortex, swirling with the echoes of laughter and tears, love and loss, hope and despair. Elias's mind screamed for release, yet his soul clung to the fragile thread of hope embodied by the boy. The crossroads lay before him. Surrender to the eternal voyage, forever ferrying the weight of his memories through the endless night, or summon the courage to shatter the cycle, risking the void beyond. His eyes met the swirling shadows of the eternal passenger. I won't be your prisoner, he said, voice trembling but resolute. But I can't leave without facing what I am. The shadow recoiled, its form flickering violently. Then face yourself, it snarled. But remember, some journeys have no end. With that, the train shuddered violently, lights flickering as the boundaries between nightmare and reality blurred. Elias took a deep breath, steeling himself for whatever came next. The choice was his and the price unimaginable. As the carriage plunged into darkness, a single thought echoed through his mind. What does it truly mean to be free, when the past is an endless train, and the future a track that never ends? The night stretched on, the train hurtling forward into the unknown, carrying with it the fragile hope of a man at the crossroads of fate. The central carriage was a cavern of shadows and whispers, the dim light flickering as if caught in a perpetual gust of cold wind. Elias stepped forward, each footfall muffled on the worn, spectral carpet that seemed to breathe beneath him. His heart thudded with a mixture of dread and grim resolve. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of aged leather and faint traces of rust and mildew. But beneath it all lurked a more insidious odor, the stench of despair and forgotten memories. Then, from the darkness, a form began to coalesce. It was the eternal passenger, the amorphous shadow that had haunted Elias' journey since the beginning. Its frame shifted unnervingly, features flickering between the faces of those Elias once loved and the monstrous reflections of his deepest fears. It spoke, though words were less sound than an unbearable dissonance, whispers, screams, laughter twisted by grief. "You cannot escape," it intoned, a chorus of voices layered in one. "All your memories, your failures, your sins, they are mine as much as yours." Elias swallowed hard, fighting the surge of panic that threatened to overwhelm him. He could feel the weight of every suitcase he had opened, every memory that had clawed its way from the depths of his mind. They pressed in on him like a tidal wave, threatening to drag him beneath the surface. And yet, amid the chaos, he grasped something fundamental, a thread of clarity woven through the torment. "I am not running anymore," Elias declared, his voice steadier than he expected. "I carry these burdens, yes, but I will not be broken by them." The eternal passenger recoiled, its features distorting in a grotesque mimicry of shock. The walls of the carriage pulsed with spectral images: his family, their laughter now silent, the faces of those he had lost, their eyes accusing yet imploring. He saw Martha Whitlock's warning gaze, the station master Harrow's cryptic smile, and even the faint glow of his younger self, standing small and hopeful in the shadows. With trembling hands, Elias lifted the battered conductor's cap from his head and held it before him like a talisman. Beside it, a suitcase pulsed with a faint, ethereal light, its surface etched with fragments of his life. He opened it slowly, the memories spilling out in a torrent of sights and sounds, each one a shard of his soul laid bare. Pain flooded him, raw and unrelenting, but he did not turn away. Instead, he embraced it, allowing the memories to wash over him, to carve their place within his being. The eternal passenger writhed, its form flickering and fragmenting under the weight of Elias's acceptance. "You are mine," it hissed, voice cracking. "You belong to this endless journey. I am more than you," Elias countered, stepping forward with newfound strength. "I am all the moments that shaped me, the love I lost, the mistakes I made. I am the emptiness and the hope. I am the journey itself." The train shuddered violently, lights flickering as the spectronite pressed against the windows like a living, breathing entity. The oppressive silence shattered with a cacophony of distant screams and whispered regrets. Yet in the midst of the chaos, Elias stood firm, a fragile beacon against the encroaching darkness. The eternal passenger's form splintered, its shadows unraveling like threads pulled taut. For a moment, a strange stillness settled, a fragile truce between torment and acceptance. But the journey was far from over. Elias's breath came in ragged gasps as he prepared for whatever awaited beyond this confrontation. The boundaries between nightmare and reality had blurred irrevocably, and the path forward remained shrouded in uncertainty. Yet as the carriage settled into an uneasy calm, Elias realized something profound. The fight was not just against the eternal passenger, but against the emptiness within himself. Only by confronting that void could he hope to find peace, or at least the strength to endure the endless journey still to come. He closed the suitcase gently, the faint glow dimming but never extinguished. Taking a deep breath, Elias faced the darkened corridor ahead, the promise of the unknown stretching before him like the endless tracks beneath the train. And somewhere, deep within the shifting shadows, the eternal passenger waited, not defeated, but transformed, a reminder that the journey through memory and self is eternal, a passage with no clear end. The final confrontation was over, but the story was far from finished. Elias's soul would continue to ride the spectral rails, a conductor of memories, regrets, and fleeting hopes, forever trapped between the haunting silence of the station and the endless night beyond. The dim glow of the lanterns overhead cast long, wavering shadows along the polished wood paneling of the dining car. The rhythmic clatter of the train's wheels against the rails filled the space with a hypnotic cadence, like the slow, steady heartbeat of a creature half alive, half phantom. Elias Granger stood alone amid the endless rows of suitcases that lined the narrow aisle, their worn leather and tarnished brass clasps whispering secrets only he could hear. The weight of their collective memories pressed down on him, tangible and suffocating. He ran a trembling hand over the nearest suitcase, a battered trunk etched with faded initials he recognized all too well. The scent of old leather and distant rain rose from it, stirring a memory of a summer afternoon long past, of laughter that now felt like a cruel echo. His breath caught. Each case was a fragment of his own life, a shard of joy, regret, and sorrow bound tight within these spectral containers. From the shadows, the air shifted, growing colder and heavier. The eternal passenger emerged, an amorphous figure of darkness with shifting human features that flickered like a flame caught in a breeze. Its eyes, deep wells of despair, locked onto Elias with a gaze that pierced through flesh and bone to the raw nerves beneath. "You cannot flee," it whispered, voice like the rustle of dead leaves. "You carry these burdens still. They are yours to bear for eternity." Elias swallowed hard, the taste of dust and bitter earth filling his mouth. "Why me?" he demanded, voice cracking with a mixture of defiance and despair. "Why this endless journey?" The shadowy figure did not answer, only extended a hand that seemed to dissolve into smoke. Elias's gaze fell to the suitcase at his feet, one he had not opened, heavy and unyielding, marked with the scars of a lifetime of choices and consequences. A soft glow flickered at the far end of the carriage, and there stood young Elias, the spectral child of memory and innocence, his small frame bathed in a gentle, pale light. The boy's eyes held no judgment, only a quiet invitation to remember who he once was before the weight of the world had settled so heavily on his shoulders. Elias took a step toward the boy, heart aching with the fragile hope that perhaps redemption was not beyond reach. But the eternal passenger loomed closer, its presence a suffocating shroud that chilled the marrow in his bones. "You must choose," it intoned. "Accept your fate and the endless road, or fight for freedom and risk oblivion. There is no middle path." The train's windows blurred into swirling mist, the outside world dissolving into a liminal space where time folded upon itself like a never-ending loop. Elias's hand hovered over the suitcase, the symbol of his past, his regrets, his very soul. His mind screamed for escape, for release from this spectral prison. Yet the thought of surrendering to this eternal journey filled him with a profound, melancholic dread. He closed his eyes, the faces of lost loved ones, the echoes of laughter and tears, flashing through his mind like fractured shards of a shattered mirror. The emptiness inside him stretched wide, a cavernous void that threatened to swallow him whole. But in the silence beyond the clatter, beyond the shadows and the endless luggage, a single truth crystallized. This journey was his to bear, for better or worse. Whether he embraced it or rejected it, the train would carry him onward, through the corridors of memory and eternity. Elias opened his eyes to the dim light of the carriage once more. The eternal passenger waited, a shadow among shadows, patient and unyielding. Young Elias smiled faintly, a beacon in the darkness, before fading into the mist. The choice remained uncertain, unbearable, eternal. With a slow, deliberate breath, Elias reached out, fingers brushing the worn leather of the suitcase. The train's wheels sang their mournful song, and the journey pressed on into the night, where the line between reality and nightmare blurred. And the endless voyage through the corridors of the self continued without end. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the dread and the emptiness, a flicker of hope remained, a fragile ember against the encroaching dark. The night stretched ahead, infinite and unforgiving, as the ghostly train carried Elias forward, ever onward. The platform was swallowed by a thick, creeping fog that snaked its way around the rusted rails and cracked concrete. Under the ghostly glow of the full moon, the train's wheels groaned a haunting, metallic lament that echoed across the empty station. Elias Granger stood motionless, his gaunt frame silhouetted against the spectral carriages that seemed to breathe with a life of their own. The endless suitcases that had filled the aisles now appeared as silent sentinels, each one a fragment of his existence, waiting patiently for the next journey. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and cold metal, the silence punctuated only by the distant, mournful whistle of the locomotive. Elias's breath came in shallow clouds, mingling with the mist that curled around his feet like the tendrils of some ancient, restless spirit. He reached out a trembling hand, brushing the worn surface of a suitcase etched with faded initials, memories of a life both cherished and cursed. The weight of countless regrets pressed upon him, a tangible burden that threatened to crush the fragile remnants of his sanity. From the shadows near the station entrance, Martha Whitlock watched silently. Her stooped figure seemed almost part of the decaying architecture, her sharp eyes reflecting a sorrow born of decades spent guarding this haunted place. She did not speak. Words had long since lost their power here. Instead, she offered a nod, a quiet acknowledgement of the inevitability unfolding before them. The train was leaving, and with it, Elias's chance at escape grew ever more tenuous. The fog thickened, swallowing the edges of the platform and blurring the boundary between the known and the unknowable. Station Master Harrow's pale, translucent form flickered briefly near the signal box, his ghostly gaze lingering on Elias, as if to offer one final cryptic warning. Then he vanished, dissolving into the mist like a fading dream. Elias stepped onto the platform's edge, feeling the chill seep into his bones. The train's engine rumbled to life, its spectral pulse quickening as the first carriage began to move. The endless line of luggage shifted slightly, as though restless, eager to continue their eternal voyage through the corridors of time and memory. Elias's fingers clutched a single suitcase, the leather cracked and cold beneath his touch, a repository of moments he could neither forget nor fully remember. A faint whisper brushed against his ear, the voice of the eternal passenger, a shifting shadow whose human features morphed with each breath. It lingered just out of reach, a dark promise of torment and reckoning. Elias's heart pounded with a mixture of fear and reluctant acceptance. The train was more than metal and steam. It was a vessel of his soul's endless journey, a purgatory forged from his own regrets and lost hopes. Slowly, inexorably, the train began to glide forward, its wheels humming a dirge that resonated with the very core of Elias's being. The mist swallowed the carriages whole, and the station faded into a blur of shadows and silence. Behind him, the world he once knew slipped away, leaving only the cold embrace of the unknown. As the ghostly locomotive disappeared into the night, the platform stood empty once more. Martha Whitlock's figure lingered, a solitary witness to the cycle that would repeat with each full moon's rise. The air was heavy with the weight of unspoken stories and unresolved fates. Time stretched and folded, eternity pressing in from all sides. And somewhere beyond the veil of reality, Elias Granger rode on, trapped between past and future, memory and oblivion, forever bound to the endless journey that awaited him at the next moon's rise. The silence deepened, broken only by the distant echo of a mournful whistle, fading slowly into the abyss. The train would return, and so would he. The chill of the early morning wrapped around the abandoned railway station like a shroud, the air thick with the lingering mist of night, and the faint scent of damp earth. Martha Whitlock stood alone on the cracked platform, her stooped figure silhouetted against the pale wash of dawn. Her weathered hands clutched a faded photograph, edges worn and creased from years of handling, a picture of Elias Granger, the conductor who had boarded the ghostly train, now vanished into the mists of the station's eternal curse. The photograph trembled slightly in her grasp, as if weighed down by the memories it carried. Martha's sharp eyes, despite their age, held a fierce clarity, reflecting the sorrow and burden she bore as the station's caretaker and guardian of secrets long buried. For decades, she had watched the moon's cycle dictate the arrival of the spectral midnight train, a vessel of endless luggage and no passengers, ferrying lost souls through a liminal space between life and death. As the first rays of sunlight struggled to penetrate the heavy fog, the distant echo of the train's fading whistle vibrated through the stillness, a haunting call that seemed to ripple through time itself. The sound stirred the dry leaves scattered across the platform stones, sending them swirling in restless eddies that whispered of journeys not yet ended. Martha's heart tightened with the familiar ache of inevitability. The cycle was unbroken, and it would begin anew with the next full moon. Turning away from the edge of the platform, Martha retreated to the small caretaker's hut nestled beside the tracks. Inside, the room was cloaked in shadows, the walls lined with relics of a bygone era, rusted lanterns, faded railway signs, and dusty journals chronicling the station's haunted past. She moved with deliberate care, lighting a single candle whose flickering flame danced across the walls, casting elongated shadows that seemed to reach out like spectral fingers. Her fingers traced the spines of the old journals as she settled into her worn chair, the weight of history pressing down on her. Each page told stories of the station's origins, the tragedies that had scarred its foundation, and the countless souls ensnared by the train's unyielding curse. Among the faded ink and brittle paper, Martha found solace and sorrow intertwined, a testament to the enduring legacy she was bound to uphold. A soft sigh escaped her lips as she whispered into the silence, "Another journey begins, and another soul is lost to the endless night." Her voice was a fragile thread weaving through the still air, a vow spoken to the empty station and the restless spirits it harbored. She knew the truth Elias had faced in the depths of the ghostly train, that the endless luggage was more than mere baggage. It was the weight of memory, regret, and the inescapable burden of existence itself. Martha's gaze drifted back to the photograph, the face of Elias framed by the soft glow of candlelight. In his eyes, she saw the reflection of every soul trapped within the station's grasp, haunted, searching, and bound to a fate beyond escape. Yet beneath the sorrow, there was a flicker of something else, a fragile hope that perhaps, through remembrance and acknowledgement, the cycle might one day be broken. Outside, the station remained silent, the tracks stretching endlessly into the mist like veins carrying the heartbeat of eternity. The ghostly train had departed once more, its spectral carriages swallowed by the night, leaving behind only echoes and shadows. But Martha Whitlock, keeper of the station's secrets, stood resolute. She was the guardian of memory, the watcher between worlds, and though the journey was endless, her vigil would not waver. As the dawn deepened, the platform lay deserted once again, the silence pressing in like a living thing. The cycle awaited its next turn, the full moon's pale light ready to summon the midnight train and its burden of endless luggage. And in the quiet corners of the station, the echoes of Elias's passage lingered, a haunting reminder that some journeys never end, and some souls remain forever tethered to the corridors of the self. The station breathed with the weight of history, and Martha, with a heavy heart, prepared for the inevitable return. The story was far from over. With every moon's rise, the train would come again, and the endless journey would continue, a spectral dance of memory loss, and the eternal struggle between acceptance and escape. And so, beneath the watchful eyes of the stars, the haunted station waited, its silence a solemn promise that the echoes on the platform would never fade. But as Martha closed her eyes and let the candle's flame waver in the quiet, she whispered one final word, a prayer, a plea, a hope that somewhere beyond the endless night, Elias might find the peace that had eluded him in life and death alike. Until then, the station remained a threshold, a place where past and present collided, and the ghostly train carried its burden through the corridors of eternity. The air inside the ghostly train was heavy with a silence so profound it seemed to press against my very bones. I moved through the dim corridors, the endless array of suitcases lining the walls like sentinels of forgotten lives. Their surfaces bore the scars of time, frayed leather straps, rusted buckles, faded tags with names I no longer recognized. Yet, beneath those names, beneath the wear and tear, each case seemed to pulse with a quiet life, as if harboring secrets too vast to be spoken aloud. I reached out, my fingers trembling as they brushed against a suitcase that seemed to flicker at my touch. The coldness seeped into my skin, a chill that spread rapidly through my limbs, igniting a familiar etch deep within. Memories rose, unbidden fragments of laughter from a sunlit afternoon, the sharp sting of loss in a shadowed room, the hollow echo of footsteps left behind. I blinked, trying to steady myself, but the train's walls began to breathe, expanding and contracting like the chest of a sleeping giant. Ahead, a faint glow caught my eye. I turned slowly, heart pounding, and there he was, young Elias, a spectral child clad in the worn clothes of a time long past. His small form shimmered softly, a beacon of fragile hope amid the encroaching darkness. He looked toward me with eyes wide and brimming with innocence, but as I reached out, desperate to grasp that fleeting light, he dissolved into the mist, leaving a hollow ache that settled deep in my chest. The corridors stretched endlessly, the suitcases multiplying beyond count, their shadows twisting into grotesque shapes that danced just beyond my vision. A whisper curled around my ankles, a voice both cold and familiar. I looked down and saw the eternal passenger, a shifting shadow coiling like smoke, its form ever elusive yet suffocatingly near. It murmured accusations and despair, a litany of my deepest fears and regrets. I stumbled backward, the crushing weight of my failures pressing down like the coldest winter night. Yet, amid the suffocating gloom, a spark kindled within me, a flicker of defiance that refused to be extinguished. I clenched my fists, grounding myself against the tide of torment. "You do not own me," I whispered, voice trembling but resolute. The shadow recoiled, hissing like a wounded beast, but it did not fade entirely. Instead, it lingered, a persistent reminder of the burden I carried. I found myself on a vast, empty platform bathed in the pale glow of a ghostly moon. The fog hung thick and heavy, swallowing the edges of the world and blurring the boundary between earth and sky. My footsteps echoed hollowly as I walked slowly, each step a meditation on the endless journey I was condemned to undertake. Around me, shadows stretched and twisted, merging with the night, embodying the eternal voyage through memory and time. In this liminal place, I realized the truth that had been gnawing at the edges of my consciousness. This torment was not mine alone. It was the universal struggle of every soul burdened by memory, regret, and the relentless passage of time. The emptiness I felt was a mirror reflecting the loneliness inherent in the human condition, a silence that echoed through the corridors of every life. My mind raced, grappling with the enormity of this revelation. Was there a path beyond this endless cycle, or was I doomed to wander forever within the shadows of my past? The train's endless journey continued around me, a ceaseless passage through the corridors of eternity. The suitcases whispered, the shadows shifted, and the eternal passenger watched, waiting for my next move. I stood at the brink of understanding and despair, caught between the desire to surrender and the fierce will to fight. The haunting emptiness stretched before me like an ocean without horizon, and I knew this journey was far from over. As the cold silence deepened, I whispered into the night, what lies beyond these shadows? The answer, like the train itself, remained elusive, an eternal question suspended in the lingering shadows. The journey through the endless corridors continued, the weight of memory pressing heavily upon me. Each step I took was a step deeper into the labyrinth of my soul, where the past and present entwined in a haunting dance. The train's spectral glow cast eerie patterns upon the walls, illuminating the countless suitcases that held fragments of my life and identity. I paused before a cluster of cases, their surfaces mottled and cracked, each one a silent testament to moments lost and choices made. The air was thick with the scent of dust and forgotten dreams, a perfume both sweet and suffocating. I reached out and brushed my fingers along a worn handle, and the memories surged forth, laughter from a childhood long past, the warmth of a mother's embrace, the sharp sting of absence and regret. The presence of young Elias lingered nearby, a faint hope in the darkness. His eyes held the promise of innocence and a future untainted by sorrow. But as the memories grew darker, his glow dimmed, and I felt the crushing weight of my journey settle upon my shoulders once more. The eternal passenger's whisper returned, a cold reminder of the inescapable burden I bore. Yet in the depths of my despair, a fragile ember of resistance flickered. The endless journey stretched before me, but within its shadows lay the possibility of reconciliation, of peace beyond the torment. As the train hurtled through the eternal night, I understood that the lingering shadows were not merely the remnants of my past, they were the essence of the human condition itself. A testament to the enduring struggle between memory and oblivion, between despair and hope. And so I walked onward into the unknown, the endless corridors of my soul unfolding before me like a dark, infinite labyrinth. The train's haunting whistle echoed through the silence, a mournful song for the journey that never ends. The cold mist hung low over the abandoned railway station, a veil of silvery haze that blurred the edges of the world and swallowed the faintest sounds. Dawn was still hours away, yet the first pale threads of light teased the horizon, mixing uneasily with the lingering shadows. I stood on the platform, the weight of the endless luggage still pressing upon my chest, the silence around me as vast and hollow as the train itself. Behind me, the ghostly midnight train waited its carriages, stretching into the darkness like the ribs of some great spectral beast. Each compartment was burdened with suitcases piled sky-high, their surfaces gleaming faintly, as though lit from within by some otherworldly glow. The endless procession of luggage whispered secrets I wasn't sure I wanted to hear again. I shivered, though the air was still and cool. The emptiness of the station was absolute, save for the distant, almost imperceptible creak of the train settling on the tracks. Somewhere deep inside, a part of me resisted this place, this moment. But another part, the part that had clung to every fragment of memory, every ghostly echo, knew there was no turning back. A soft rustle at my side caught my attention. I turned slowly, half expecting the eternal passenger to materialize out of the fog, but instead there he stood, young Elias, small and glowing faintly, his presence a fragile beam of light piercing the darkness. His eyes met mine, wide, innocent, filled with a hope I hadn't felt in years. For a moment, the crushing weight of regret and the endless corridors of memory lifted, replaced by a fragile warmth. "You remember?" I murmured, voice cracking, reaching out, but before my fingers could brush his ghostly cheek, he faded into the mist, leaving only a whisper of laughter and the faint scent of pine and rain. I swallowed hard, the fleeting light retreating into the shadows of the past. The eternal passenger was waiting, I knew. Somewhere in the depths of that endless train, its amorphous form shifted, flickering between monstrous shadows and distorted human features. It was the embodiment of my fears, my guilt, my regrets, a relentless spectre that sought to bind me to this eternal voyage. I stepped onto the platform, the wooden planks creaking beneath my boots, the mist curling around my legs like a living thing. The train's whistle echoed through the station, a hollow, mournful sound that seemed to reverberate not just through the air, but through the very core of my being. "You cannot run," the voice whispered, carried on the wind, yet sharp and clear as a knife. "You belong here as always. The journey never ends." I clenched my fists, the cold biting into my skin. "Perhaps," I whispered back, "but I will not surrender without a fight." The train's doors hissed open, inviting me back into its spectral belly. I hesitated, every fiber of my being screaming to flee, yet the inexorable pull of the endless journey held me fast. I stepped forward, the platform disappearing beneath my feet as the train began to move, slow and inevitable. As we pulled away, the mist thickened, swallowing the station whole. Martha Whitlock's silhouette appeared briefly on the platform, stooped, sharp-eyed, her weathered hands folded in quiet farewell. Her presence was a tether to the world I had left behind, a reminder of the fragile boundary between reality and nightmare. The train's whistle faded into the distance, mingling with the echoes of forgotten memories and lost time. The endless corridors stretched before me once more, the suitcases piled high like monuments to a life weighed down by mistakes, love, loss, and longing. And as the night swallowed us whole, I understood, this was not just a journey through space or time, but through the very corridors of the self, an eternal voyage with no clear end, no promise of peace. Yet, even in the depths of despair, a fragile hope lingered, like the faintest glimmer of dawn on the horizon. Was there redemption to be found amidst the shadows? Or was I doomed to wander these spectral carriages forever, a prisoner of my own memories, my own regrets? The train thundered on into the unknown, its endless journey beginning anew, the cycle poised to repeat with the next full moon. And I, Elias Granger, conductor of a ghostly train burdened with the weight of eternity, rode on into the darkness, into the silence, into the endless night. As the first hints of dawn touched the sky, I whispered into the cold air, "Until we meet again." And somewhere deep within the shifting shadows, the eternal passenger smiled an expressionless, haunting promise that the journey was far from over. The endless journey continues.